Hello and welcome to this special edition of Dialogue, coming to you from Munich, Germany, on the occasion of the annual Munich Security Conference. As the world faces accelerating changes in the complex and turbulent international landscape, this year's gathering shines a spotlight on the growing trend of multipolarization. Yet, at the same time, there are concerns about the potential return of the law of the jungle, where might makes right. So what kind of a multipolar world are we moving toward, and how can we navigate this shift in a fair and orderly way? And what role will major powers play in a multipolar world? That's our topic. I'm Xu Qianduo. Today's discussion, Arancha González, Dean of the Paris School of International Affairs, Sciences Po, and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain. And Nicole Deitelhoff, Executive Director of Peace Research Institute, Frankfurt. And also we have Dr. Huiyao Wang, founder and president of CCG, Center of China and Globalization, and Zhou Bo, senior fellow of the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Minister, I will start with you. This year's Munich Security Conference, obviously the dominating issue is still Ukraine, the U.S. peace plan, and with, of course, other topics. So, what's your takeaway?
My takeaway from this year's conference is that it's not clear what's the direction we are taking, whether the direction is a new Yalta, a division of the world in spheres of influence and interest, like at the end of the Second World War. Are we at the beginning of a new Cold War, or are we in a Helsinki moment when we agree to build a more multipolar, a world of equals, a world where whether you're a big military power or not, you've got to live with your neighbors and with the others. It's unclear. We've got versions of the two. We've had versions of a new Cold War. We have versions of a more cooperative world. Unclear which direction we will go.
Uncertainty. Huiyao, what's your key word here?
Thank you. I agree with Minister Arancha, absolutely. What I found actually, I was a few days earlier also in Berlin for the kickoff of Munich Security Conference. And then they actually issued this year report, which is multipolarization. So I think this is because last year the Munich Security Conference report was lose-lose, and then the year before that was West-lessness. So from West-lessness to lose-lose to multipolarization. So I think multipolarization is becoming a reality, and that has been recognized by the Munich Security Conference. So and also this time they are doing it by action as well. More than 30% of the participants coming from Global South now. So I think this Munich Security Conference could be a turning point at the 61st, after 6 decades, this new start of another 6 decades. The first one was ushering a multipolar world, which I think, of course, we have to work together, US, China, and of course EU and Global South. So I think this time, this Munich Security Conference, even though compared with last few years, there's more talk about war, fighting, human rights and everything. Now you talk about how going to end it, how to, really more acceptable way for both all the parties involved.
Professor Deitelhoff, your research is about peace. So whatever direction we want to maintain peace.
Well, I think that what we've seen is that the global order has been set in motion, but we don't know which direction this motion will take. What we see is that political alignments have become looser, have been loosened, but we don't know what direction they will shift to. Will there be enough states who will cling to a rules-based order? We don't know yet. So this is what I take from this Munich Security Conference: uncertainty, plus flexibility, and we don't know flexibility to what direction.
Zhou Bo, yes, multipolarization. China has been calling for multipolar world for a long time, but of course with some defining features, that is, in an equitable and orderly manner. China is calling for basically equal treatment for every country, big or small, powerful or not. What do you make of that, together with this year's conference here?
I have attended quite a few Munich Security Conference, and I believe this year's is a watershed moment because in the past, as Huiyao has pointed out, the titles of the different conferences, and I can even recall one which was earlier that was basically a question: is the world falling apart? Yeah, which is a question. So, but all those titles in the past were actually expressions of a kind of sentiments. But this year, multipolarization is a clear indication of direction. Yeah, so this is a major difference, and I believe this is a watershed moment. What impressed me at this conference is not only Wang's remarks, but also Wang's remarks when he talked about how China should become a kind of stabilizing element in the disorder. And he also mentioned equally in an impressive way that multipolarization should not be characterized by disorder. Mm-hmm. So because multipolarization has its own danger, yeah? With so many poles, who is going to manage all these different poles, right? Mm-hmm. Should we just governed by the law of the jungle? That is another challenge for multipolarization.
Right. Minister, you mentioned about Yalta, probably another. President Trump, did talk about his meeting with President Xi and President Putin. It gave you, an image of the leaders of the major powers somehow managing global affairs. Is that the way to go?
Look, the world is certainly more complex. And I'm not sure that the world is multipolarized yet. What I think is that the world is no longer unipolar. That's for sure. Economically, it is multipolar because you have many actors that have a big say and a big stake in the system. Militarily, it's still unipolar. The US is by far the biggest spender on military affairs than the second, that is China. And then come many others, but very far behind. But then on technology, the driving force is not nation states, it's not poles, it's businesses. So in technology, it's multi-power, not multipolar. We have an example of that. We have the head of a big business in the US that is now seated in the White House. He is not appointed. He does not have a mandate. He is a businessman sitting in the White House.
But so, very influential.
Very influential, absolutely. So the world is much more complex in its composition. The world is much more nuanced in its expectations. And the difficulty we have is what governance will we give this more complex world? Will this governance be decided by... Will this governance be decided by 3 or 4? Or will this governance be decided by all? Mm-hmm. My sense is that if we want to make this a resilient system, it cannot just be decided in a phone call between the president of the US, the president of Russia, and the president of China, even if the three are very important countries. Mm-hmm. That you also need to speak with the president of the EU, you need to speak with the president of India, Mexico, Indonesia, South Africa, and the rest.
But it seems that's the approach from the US. President Trump and President Putin had a phone conversation, and then they decided, okay, here's Ukraine has to make concessions. So territorial loss and also no member of NATO. And of course, mineral resources, half of them will be the US. Mineral resources, half of them will be the US. What's the response from the European side?
Very simple. First of all, we are not talking about peace. We are talking about the space where there is a ceasefire. And in this conversation, there will not be a decision about the future of Ukraine without Ukrainians, and there will not be a decision about the security in the European continent without the Europeans. That's Clear answer on Ukraine, that is a European country. Now, that means that Europeans have to get their act together. They have to put on the table their views and their requests and their demands, because I would find it a bit bizarre that the security architecture of the European continent is discussed without Europeans sitting at the table.
Exactly, Professor. It's like, a former U.S. Secretary of State talked about if you are not at the table, you are on the menu.
I think for Europe, the task is to make itself indispensable for peace in Ukraine. Otherwise, it won't have a seat at the table. And we have to acknowledge that Europe didn't do that in the past. It has slept for a decade at least. It didn't come up with It didn't come up with the resources, it didn't come up with strategies to take care of security in Europe or to take care of the path towards peace in Ukraine, at least not enough. And now is the time that it has to get its act together. I completely agree.
Huiyao, I know like a lot of participants of this year's conference actually was shocked with the message from the U.S. side with the peace plan and also the speeches given by the U.S. senior officials. Defense Secretary, for example, basically said that return to the 2014 territory the situation is not possible. No NATO membership there, and of course J.D. Vance basically lecturing the Europeans about their problems there. What's your response? What's your feeling on that?
One thing I do notice that U.S. Defense Secretary mentioned about that. He said, okay, U.S. will not send troops to Ukraine, and then it has to be European troops there, and other country troops. So, and other country troops, I don't know what he meant by that, but I was thinking, if that proposal to Putin made, and then say only European troops out of NATO, I'm sure Putin probably would not go along with that. But then if there's UN peacekeeping forces there, if there's a UN keeping force from India, from China, and by the way, China is the largest peacekeeping sending country among the P5, or maybe Brazil. So that could probably fly with both sides, and then we may see a more guarantor for the Ukraine crisis there. So I think that this process has started, but I agree, EU and Ukraine should be on the table, not just between US and Russia. So absolutely, I'm glad now. Gaza seems, even though very challenging still, but at least the war has been stopped, ceasefire. I hope that Ukraine will do the same. So on that respect, I agree with President Trump that we should stop killing. That's human casualties is horrendous. We can't afford that. So, but fairly making a deal for the Ukraine and the peace, I think needs everybody's efforts, including the UN, that we should not forget, which is established after the Second World War to safeguard world peace. So, just not between the 2 or 3 countries, has to get UN, and let's get P5 involved on that.
Zhou Bo, if that's the case, basically, the US and Russia decides the direction, how the ceasefire will be achieved, how peace will be achieved, without much participation from the European Union, from Ukraine. Is that situation you expect? You think that's positive or negative to the global order?
I think it's impossible. You forgot to mention one country, China. I tell you why. Because when no war will last forever, even if we don't know how long it will last. But eventually there would be a time when people have to accept a ceasefire. The question for Ukraine is who can guarantee the ceasefire? President Zelensky talked about a security collective guarantee, which involves the neighboring country and the major powers, short of China. He didn't mention China. I realize that. But deep in the memory of Ukrainians, what they can remember is a collective security guarantee when they decided to give up nuclear weapons in the 1990s.
Right.
Yeah. So why do I mention China? Because with China's participation, I would believe both sides will feel somewhat comfortable, because with Ukraine, it's understood that the whole West will be, backing Ukraine. But even on Russia's side, Russia also needs a kind of a collective security guarantee, because Russia doesn't want to stand alone. Then President Putin mentioned China, India, and Brazil, who could just work as mediators. So this may not involve all these countries, but China being there, as a kind of the broker, would actually make two sides more comfortable, I would say. Yeah. And then what else can China do? China actually can do three things. One is being part of the collective security guarantee. The second thing is to send the peacekeepers, as Huiyao has pointed out. But then there is a question of how UN might be involved, because Russia is one of the members of the P5. So the conditions for peacekeeping is first the consent of the warring parties, and then the endorsement of the UN Security Council. But in this case, yeah, it is a very special case. So if UN has to be involved, then it has to be a kind of special arrangements. And then finally, China's role in the post-war reconstruction, I believe, will be there, because I don't know where the money would come from, but in terms of infrastructure capability, China is simply next to none, right? And China can build it more efficiently with less cost.
Professor Deitelhoff, also happening at the conference is J.D. Vance's speech. There's a lot of talk about that. He said the threat to the European Union is not Russia, it's not China. His words, quote, is from within. Do you agree with him?
I think what Vance did in his speech was to say, if Europe is not taking the American way of democracy as we define it momentarily, which is not the kind of liberal democratic way that we're used to in Europe, then we are not friends anymore. We're not sure that you are reliable allies anymore. So this is a stark moment for our transatlantic partnership, because this current administration does have a very different view of democracies than we have of the way of life that we thought we share. I mean, this is about an administration. It's not about the United States of America. We have a long-standing partnership, and I'm pretty sure that our partnership can survive it. But it will be a very hard time.
Well, Zhou Bo, I want your input here. Obviously, China always, as Minister Wang said, China views the EU an important polar in this multipolar world. China, basically wants to strengthen the ties with the European Union side. What's the next step? What we can do on both sides to strengthen the relationship? For example, trade and investment, etc. People to people, science, tech.
We have already seen European Union inching towards China as a result of all these kind of changes in the geopolitical landscape. Because even before this Munich Security Conference, von der Leyen, the so-called top EU hawk, has actually softened her tone to talk even about new agreement with China. And I believe this is a kind of goodwill gesture, but it's also a kind of a tactical move, to draw attention from the United States. Yeah. And she even mentioned, in a cynical world, tone that the EU is a big market, so on and so forth. So as a result, I believe EU will get a China, because China always, wish to maintain good relationship with the EU. The problem between us is something sad for China. That is the war in Ukraine. Why this relationship becomes sour? Because of a war that has nothing to do with China. Because nowadays in the world, you can hardly say this is not my business. I mean, as a Chinese, everything has something to do with China. I myself never know that all countries would all of a sudden ask China, what is your position on this war? And which side would you take? Yeah? We thought, okay, we were not informed about this war. We were not providing assistance to Russia. Why would you come to me?
Not used to the new situation, right?
Now, this answer is very simple. And this is what I wrote in Financial Times. This is the price you pay for being a major power. You can never say that this is not my business. Everything has something to do with you. Yeah, so I think the most difficult part is for us to convince Europeans that, yes, in spite of the fact that we are doing business with Russia, you see, this relationship would not affect our relationship because Europeans would consider China providing kind of military assistance to Russia, by this kind of normal trade. We're not providing assistance because this kind of trading was there before the war. And now there is a change. The change is that the trade volume seems to become bigger just because Russia could not buy as from Europe, and so they turn to China. And then the one critical word is this so-called dual-use item. Yes. But this is my argument. For example, if we talk about gas and oil, nobody would think much about it. But if it is put into the truck, a military truck, then it is a military product, right? But normally people do not consider oil, gas as a military product. So when something is dual-use in nature, you have to assume it is dual-use in nature. You have to assume it is for civilian use first. This is common sense.
Right. I mean that's a clarification, explanation. I mean we need to understand each other better. Probably. I mean China says it remains neutral between Russia and in Ukraine. China wants to develop a relationship with the EU and also with the US. But of course, what's happening is China is also facing the challenge of the global order somehow being disrupted. For example, with Trump's claim for Greenland, Canada, 51st states of the United States, Panama Canal, and Gaza to build waterfront the property developments there. What's the property developments there? How should we respond, the European Union, China, respond to this kind of behavior and policies by the most powerful country in the world?
Let me tell you, it would be stupid if you try to guess what the next step Trump will take. You can never be
Nobody
correct.
knows.
You can never be correct. But you can think about this issue in another way. That is, by the end of his second term, how the United States would look like, right? So he might have short gains here and there, but in terms of America's global image, definitely it will become much more declined. So whether this is the so-called the sunset of a Pax Americana, maybe it's a kind of exaggeration, right? But it is something that the people have started to talk about. This kind of frustration, this kind of a behavior that is so destructive, is anything but presidential. We're talking about the behavior of American president. We're talking about a country that has produced George Washington, Abraham Lincoln. How can you put all these images all together?
Professor Deitelhoff, what's the European thinking when they see, Trump claiming Greenland, for security reasons?
Quite disturbing move by an ally, territory of an ally, right? So, but then on the other hand, as you saw, we know Trump already, and we know there's this kind of Trump rhetoric. Doesn't mean that the rhetoric is mapped by realities on the ground. So I think the Europeans try to come up with a strategy where you calm down, count to 10, and then rather, make use of the dynamic this disruptive move of Trump creates and bring it into the right direction. And the right direction is try to preserve territorial integrity, try to bring up reforms for international institutions and rules that don't work the way we want them to work, that do not give equal rights to everyone, to every state, for instance. So I think this is kind of the European strategy. And then, of course, the third component is, and see that you're able to care about yourself as well. And I think these three components is what Europe's take is on Trump's deal and disruptions.
Minister, what area can China and Europe, for example, to work together? I know on climate change, both sides are very much committed. And on the international scene, what are other areas, they can work in a way that's mutually beneficial, but not targeting any other countries,
Well, I think the most important thing is for Europe and China to have a relationship that they want. Not that the relationship that they want vis-a-vis another third country.
Right.
It's about Europe having a relationship with China because it wants to have a functional relationship with China, not because of the US. And China having a relationship with Europe because it wants to have a functional relationship with Europe, not because it wants to drive a divide between the EU and the US. So I think the most important thing is for the two to build a positive agenda. I think climate change is an important one. Why? Because it is both, and why? Because it is both understand that it's a threat to humanity. And when you have something that is a threat to humanity, you have to work on making the risks smaller. National trade. The European market remains open to China, unlike other markets.
Unlike the US market, let's say.
I will not comment on who the others are, but certainly the European market remains open to China. The Chinese market has to remain open to Europeans. And the two can agree not to use unfair trading practices between themselves. The third space is multilateralism. We will need spaces for international cooperation. We will need countries to stand up for the rules-based international order, and if-based international order. And if China and the EU believe this is important to them, this is another space where they should be working together. But the most important thing is do it because it's you, not because you think this is going to be a way to annoy a third trading or a fourth trading partner.
Right. Is there a possibility of like a revival of this comprehensive investment agreement between China and the European Union?
I think there is a need to take first steps to rebuild trust, and because I think that trust has been eroded on both sides. I think it's good to build this trust, and I'm sure that we've got plenty of opportunities now to build trust. Imagine, for example, if China and the EU would coordinate between themselves, but also with other countries around the world, a response to unilateral trade policies of President Trump. Yeah. That's a good example of how to build trust in the and make sure that as many countries as possible stand for multilateralism in trade. Multilateralism in trade, not unilateralism on trade.
No, I agree with what Minister Arancha said. I think China-EU has so much in common, and that we revive this comprehensive agreement on investment is very important. And second is actually European companies, a lot of them are already in China and have JV for many, many years, big is there. So why can't we have those JVs invest back to EU and to other global South countries so we can have a better cooperation so to normalize a bit of the trust there. As far as the US is concerned, I think they are not really leaving Europe because they have a NATO here, right? And they have Europe because they have a NATO here, right? And they have a big presence. Of course, they are also doing quite a lot in the Asia Pacific. But I think their agenda this time for Trump is really want to consolidate North America and Mexico, Canada, and Panama, and Rubio first trip was to South America. Yeah. So that West Hemisphere is really Trump's next approach, with a vast territory, with big resources, with Greenland, with leadership on the Western Hemisphere. So I think U.S. is withdraw a bit of a global reach. Right now, they were incompetent of resources to spread. Now he's a bit concentrated, withdraw a bit. So let's consolidate Americas before they, again maybe take in Europe or Asia. So I think this created opportunity. We will see several big continents: Americas, Europeans, Asia's, the romance of three kingdoms. Everybody concentrate on his own business. Let's find a new way of doing things. Maybe at that time, we see how this multipolar world gone, and then we really need to reach the consensus, at least among the three largest economies, So in that sense, I think EU is so important. It can be a mediator between China and the US. And also in terms of a multilateral system, climate change, WTO, WHO, all those Paris Accord, EU and China have so much common language to at least half of the world economy is still saying yes. And then so the 25% of the US economy cannot really decide everything. So I think it's important. We have to work together.
On that note, we're coming to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.